What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Over Your Shoulder. Today, we're going to continue down the rabbit hole with Michelle's setup for Elvis Costello. Well, being that you have a couple racks inside your desk, I figured let's jump through your effects units inside the Pro X. What do we got up the top rack one here? It looks like it's a TC Electronics. I'm assuming it's some kind of a reverb.
It's the TC M350. That's my drum verb. So I switch between plate and a hall for depending on the song. And it's just on snare and toms. Okay, cool. And so those two are loaded up as individual engines, and it's kind of like two effects then, right? Yeah, and I actually just use that as a single engine. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Okay, and then we have a vintage room. What do we use in the vintage room on? Yeah, and that's for Elvis. There's one song where I switched to, it's got like a really long, swirly kind of hall and other effect going. So where the rest of the song, it's like a shorter, drier verb. So I'll pop that in for that specific effect. It's like for the songs that aren't like big and washy. Right. It's just like a specific effect. Yeah. Are you kind of like going for something like on the small side then? Is that kind of why you did the room? Like no, I just, it's weird because I like that. I can dial it in better the way with what I want with that one than the hall for some reason. Like the effects of the Midas are a little weird. So I like the way the vintage room sounds better than the hall effect. So okay. Well, it is a bit longer. I mean, it's not real long, but it's closer to about 3 seconds. Yeah. Like a generous pre-delay. I can't see it, but Okay, cool. Now you have two delays, which I guess show up as two. What's the first unit you're using that for? Yeah, and again, I'm just using one of those the way I have it routed. It comes up as a stereo, but that is another specific cue for one song. It's he's got a song called Little Triggers, and there's a repeat delay on one word in that song. So the whole reason now I have there's stuff in these racks that are literally for like one cue is because the way Elvis's show is, I cannot automate it. It is literally fly by the seat of your pants every night. He will make a set list and we'll get through probably the first 3 songs on that. And then it just goes out the window. It's literally whatever he feels like doing. And a lot of the times the band doesn't even know what's coming. Like he'll turn around and say, everybody go to D. And they're like, okay. And it's like a couple bars until they figure out what song he's doing and catch up with him. So I normally will have my desk programmed for a snapshot for every song, and I automate a lot of stuff. Okay. I can't do it with this show. What I ended up doing was setting up my effects rack so I can sort of just okay, I need this one so I can mute the other one and just turn that one on and there I go, rather than have it change for, from song to song. So that means you kind of need to set up your console to be as flexible as possible and pivot to whatever you need to focus on. How do you set up? Because I mean, the Midas is a fantastic sounding desk, but you can't put a fader anywhere. Right. Which is sometimes a disadvantage. I would just imagine it's kind of a challenge. How do you work around that on the Midas platform? Yeah, I mean that's one downside to the desk. Like I wish it had the macro keys like the Digico, and a little bit more, little more features. But I'll take the sacrifice for the way it sounds. The pop groups is kind of my saving grace. Like I will use those to group things so that I know I need to get to this immediately. So I just hit that group and it comes to the surface. And I do tend to have in every pop group, I will always have my lead vocal as part of it. The way I do my input list, because the way the Midas populates the surface as well is like a hierarchy, starting at the lowest number to the highest left to right. So I'll actually do my input patch with that in mind so that my groups can come up. I always like having my lead vocal, the last channel before the master section. Yeah. So it's weird because then I'll have to just rearrange some things on the input list because, okay, well, when I'm grouping it with this, they're higher in the input list. So then they're going to be on the other side of it. So I put a lot of thought into my workflow. So I'll use the pop groups a lot to just bring to the surface the stuff I need for different songs. And I actually started using the mute groups a lot as well, kind of as little macro keys where there's 2 songs. There's a song he does called Clubland where I have this kind of spring reverb on the side stick and the drummer's playing. I think it's the beginning of the verse, the first part of the verse. and then it switches to like a nice fat snare sound. So it's back and forth throughout the whole song. And what I did was I set up, both different reverbs in the rack. I have on the mute groups, I'll have a mute for each of those reverbs, and then a mute for the side stick and a mute for the bottom snare mic. Because when he's playing the side stick, I take out the bottom snare. So I'll just literally be like, it looks like I'm playing piano sometimes during that song, because I'm constantly bouncing back and forth between the mute keys while I can still, do the mixing I need to do with my other hand, because I can't actually have all that stuff on the surface because there's a lot of keyboard stuff happening in that song that I need to be constantly mixing. So that, prevents me from just bringing those channels up and doing what I need to do. But so, I've tried a lot of different workarounds for that. For the lack of being able to automate.
That is a particular challenge, to be able to, be flexible and design the show to be able to, they're doing this song right now, and being able to like hit a pop group and pull up whatever you need to do. Like, how many inputs are you running with Elvis?
Yeah. Well, we're at around 64 from the stage, and then of another 24 channels of effects returns. And then, with walk-in and tech, mics and that kind of stuff. I think we're at 100 total. But the thing is, he's got, the keyboard world is basically all of stage. Right. It's huge. We have a 9-foot baby grand, or a 9-foot concert grand, a Hammond B3, all kinds of vintage keyboards like an EP30, just tons of stuff. And then there's Ableton, which is providing sounds for a lot of those synths. So there's 18 actual channels of keyboard inputs. And the keyboard player literally will jump around. There's a riser with stuff, and then there's, the grand, and he'll go back and forth. There's a whirly as well. He will never play a song the same way twice. He will just be like, ooh, what am I going to do today? And you never know what's coming at you. So that's another reason, I can't automate. I literally mix the show with his inputs on the surface and Elvis, because also Elvis has 3 guitar amps, and he will switch between the blend that he's going to give you. And he also has a handful of acoustics. At any given time, he could put his electric down, go pick up an acoustic, and you just have to be ready for it. So I literally focus on what he's doing and what the keyboard player are doing, because the drummer and bass player are locked in. They're smooth, I just turn them on and they're great. But the other two is just wild card, what's coming at me. And so I literally am just watching those keyboard inputs all night to make sure everything is under control. It's very analog style mixing.
Yeah, well, it seems like you got the tools for that job. Well, let's jump back into the rack then, shall we? Looks like we have a secondary vintage room. What are you using this second one for?
That one is for my background vocals. Yeah.
Okay, cool. What's the delay below it? It looks like we have another delay, but it's a different type of delay.
Yeah, and that one actually is a stereo delay, and I use that on the background vocals as well. Just very short, 10 milliseconds on the left, 20 on the right, just to kind of widen them up. And and I'll bring that in and out depending on how I want the vocals to sit.
So are you using that in tandem with the vintage room, or are you just separate effects?
They're separate effects, but I like the vintage room is my regular background vocal reverb, and then I'll have the delay where I'll bring in all the level to as much as I want for depending on the song.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you have a secondary vintage room reverb dedicated for backgrounds? What's the difference between these two? Is there a kind of a way that you tried to sit the backgrounds in the mix a little different from the Elvis reverb?
I like to have separate control. I don't like to have all the vocals going to the same reverb, just so I can, adjust the level. Even though I might want the same sound, some voices will you'll hear the reverb better than others. Yeah. So you might not need as much on one. So rather than have to be, adjusting, with the bus ends, I'd rather just have the fader so I can adjust. And I do like a little bit of a different sound on the backgrounds, just to separate them a bit more from the lead. Okay.
Is there a particular overall sound difference that you're going for the background reverb?
Just a little bit, a little bit softer and less in your face, like just to put them in the back, just to kind of move them slightly behind. And then I use that delay to widen it up or tighten it up, depending on how because the other thing with Elvis is his the styles, it goes from punk to pop to rock to gospel. He's got almost 500 songs in his catalog. It's insane. So he covers the gamut of everything out there. So depending on the style that we're doing, whatever song we're doing, I'll just adjust the flavor with the effects as well.
So you're saying in addition to not being able to automate from song to song, now you're also going in and out of different genres.
Yes.
Well, I mean, this sounds like an easy gig. What are you talking about? Okay, so we got a chamber reverb. You've mentioned chamber a couple times, and I'll be the first to admit I seldom pull up a chamber. What are you using the chamber for?
That I use on the piano, on the actual grand piano. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It looks like we got another delay.
That one is set up like a vocal doubler, and that's just literally if I need a little extra for Elvis to get him to cut through for any reason. I don't use it very often, but sometimes he might be a little weak, and I'm like, I'll just put a little of this on, and it just kind of fattens it up a bit.
Oh, okay, cool. Is there a particular setting that you use to get that effect?
Again, it's like a really, really short delay. I'm trying to remember what I had on that. It's probably like 10 milliseconds one side and 20 on the other.
Okay, cool. Is it wide or do you keep it narrow or?
It's I'd say like 10 and 2. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So kind of
not a hard pan.
Here's where I will have to admit I had no idea. I had to look this up. This is a multi-band distortion.
Yes.
Which is awesome that Midas has this in here because I think more desks need this because this is pretty cool. What are you using this for?
And again, this is a one song effect.
Of course.
There's a song where there's one line in the middle of the song where it's a distorted voice vocal. Okay. And I pop that in for that.
Oh, that's so cool. Like what is the sound? Is like overdriven, like a
yeah, like total, just like, fuzzy, distorted mic. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool. And I think it's a fairly new addition to their effects rack because you can really create a lot of different sounds with it. So I
had no idea it had that. So I guess that would make sense, but that is pretty cool. I dig that. So you have crossover points. And then you can distort each band differently. Also, to keep in mind, everybody that's watching this, you got to be careful when you're messing with distortion. How do you pull this off? Is there anything that you need to do when setting this up to keep it from causing any issues out front, like feedback or anything?
Yeah, I mean, for what I'm using it for, it's literally like one verse, or not even a verse, one line in a verse. Okay. So I do, when I pop it in, I actually send his vocal pre-fader to it, and I will mute his main vocal and just use the distortion for that point, and then pop it back out, just switch back. But you do, like you can definitely get some feedback going. So I actually did a lot of testing with that in rehearsals to make sure it wasn't going to be a problem.
Well, let's jump over to your secondary rack. What is this guy at the top?
That's the dynamic EQ, and all three of those are for Elvis's vocal. So that's his main. The next one is the spare, and then the third one is his piano vocal.
Oh, okay. So main, spare, and then piano vocal.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to achieve with the dynamic EQ? Like, is there any focus points in Elvis's voice that you're more focused on?
Two things, like when he's talking versus when he's singing. A lot of singers tend to talk softly. They'll sing really well, but then when they talk, it's just, so you're constantly boosting and then it gets muddy. So I do that to clean that up. And also there was a couple frequencies that were tending to always just be, I'm always cutting that out, but then I'll need them later. So I will use it for that. So I don't have constant, cuts at specific frequency and then find them constantly adding it back in on certain songs, depending on the style of the song. So,
okay. So where in the chain do you usually approach the dynamic EQ? Is this at the end insert point? I'm sure Midas has an A and a B.
Yeah. This I actually did post EQ.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So is that post EQ, post compression, then dynamic EQ?
I think it was post EQ, pre compression.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember. Don't quote me on that because I can't. It's been a while. So I use the channel EQ to clean up, the whatever problems of the day, and then the dynamic EQ for the frequencies I'm always adjusting, so I can just set it and forget it, and then compress afterwards.
Okay, cool. Now I'm trying to remember the different versions of, like, just out of curiosity, like, is there a certain type of compressor in the Midas compressor profile that you like for vocals?
That's another great thing about it. It has like 4 or 5 different compressors that you can choose from, and I really like the corrective compressor on vocals. I use it a lot. I also like the adaptive compressor. That I like that on kick and bass. And I think there's like a vintage, and I think I use that on acoustic guitars sometimes. Yeah, I like the corrective. The corrective seems to be like the overall, it sounds good on whatever you put it on.
Okay. And then now we got another one of these, the 350s, right? What are you using this guy on?
That is the spring reverb for the side stick, and also for the snare and the toms. So there's like 2 songs that have this specific sound, and that's what I use that for.
What's the secondary sound?
It's just kind of like almost like a slapback on the drums.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like not quite dub, but that little like pingy slapback. Yeah.
All right. So we got another dynamic EQ, which is the spare. And then we have another vintage room. What do we got? What do we got going on here?
And that's just for guitars. If, you know, we happen to be in a really dry room and I just need a little bit more life on the guitars.
All the electric guitars or all the guitars in general?
Yeah, electric and acoustic. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then we have another dynamic EQ. That's the piano vocal. We're at the end of it. We got the last delay. What is this final delay being used for?
And that's a tap delay for Elvis's vocal.
Okay. This is like a repeated thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, you know, not on every song, but certain songs. Yeah.
Okay.
But
cool.
just the simple, like tap in the tempo and there you go.
All right. So earlier you mentioned something about pushing this digital desk hard. When we were talking on the phone, you'd said something about like hitting the master hard. So is there a sound there that you're going for? What's going on there? Like,
you know, like you know, from the days of mixing on an XL4, you know, just running that console almost into the red because the harder you hit it, the better it sounded.
Yeah.
I'll hit my input gain, you know, pretty solid into the yellow and end up running my masters because when everything subs together, it's masters at 0 is just killing it. So I'll end up running my masters back a bit to compensate. And I know it's like horrible gain structure technically, but I cannot get the sound that I want doing it the other way. Like if I back my input gain down to where I'm just, you know, green, not hitting the yellow, it's at 0, whatever, and bring the masters up, it's a different sound. And I've tried it because it pains me that I'm like butchering gain structure, but it's the sound that I like from it. It's just like a fatter, fuller sound by hitting the inputs hard. And it also, I find, especially with drums, you know, I will go for that, you know, just into the yellow, really good, solid input on my drums. And that gives me my drum sound. A lot of guys like to use the parallel compression and, you know, a drum crush group and stuff like that for when they want that heavy hitting drum sound. But I find setting up my gain that way and using EQ when the drummer's playing softer, you know, you still have the clarity. And then when he really starts, you know, nailing it, you know, diving into it, the EQ will provide that attack and that punch, you know, because of the way the gain is. Like I said, I've tried to, you know, bring my gain down and on the inputs and run the masters at 0, but it's not the same sound.
Okay.
So and my masters will still be hitting, you know, pretty heavy in the yellow as it is.
So you've tried basically pulling all your input faders down and running your master hotter, but it's not the same sound. Is that what you're saying?
Well, not the input faders, because I'll run the inputs, the faders around 0, but the head amp gain. Like I'm usually just like on an analog desk, you know, you're hitting solid yellow almost into the red, you know, just really strong signal.
I mean, that's the plus side to the Midas. That preamp has a sound, right? And you say that the hitting the main bus has a sound too. Not only are you pushing the input channels, but you're also kind of pushing the left right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. So this brings me to the big question, and it's a question that I ask everyone that comes on. What's your secret sauce?
I mean, I really don't know if I have one. I think it's more of it's pretty old school. Like, you know, like I was saying earlier, less is more and keep it simple. You know, I like to start with great sounds at the source. You know, if you've got good musicians with good gear that sounds good, you know, you got your guitar tones that are just dialed in and singing and drums that are tuned right and everything is, you know, thoughtfully placed in the frequency spectrum. When you've got a band who understands arranging music, it's amazing. So many times I think the musicians, you know, the older, more veteran ones get it, but a lot of younger ones, they don't think about how they build their instruments, like how they build their tones, especially like drummers. You get a lot of young drummers, they pick out their snare drum and their cymbals for the way they like the feel, but they don't consider how it's competing with the vocals. Yeah. And I hate to tell you, drummers, but you know, you're never going to win that fight. You know, it's going to be bury the snare drum so you can hear the lead vocal. And I've had that with some young drummers where they just wanted this pingy, you know, feel of the snare drum where it was constantly competing with the vocal. vocal, and you can't get it through their head that, well, that no one's going to hear the snare then because it's going to be under the vocal. But if you think about like, okay, if I get a snare drum that sits well between the vocals and everything else going on, and if my cymbals aren't harsh, just even the between the brightness and darkness of cymbals, when you work with a drummer who understands how all that works in a mix between guitars and vocals and other instruments, and a guitar player who understands his tone versus everything that's going on, and keyboard players who adjust their patches to fit, it's amazing because it's like a band that mixes themselves. You get musicians who really get that, and it's incredible because you just turn it on and it's golden. I really like to try and work from the start. Let's get everything sounding great on stage before I put a mic on it. Listen to what the instruments sound like where the musicians are hearing them, not 100 feet out in the house, and then go from there, and then like find the right mic so that you're capturing the sound the way you want it to, and good gain structure, and and from there, like some EQ, some stereo imaging, and group it. I'll do some light compression. Like I like to use compression for dynamic control as opposed to coloring and the more creative stuff. I tend to only use it where I have to, which like in Elvis's case with our keyboard player. Unfortunately, on some of the inputs, I have to do like it's limiting because his levels will go from minus 12 dB to plus 6 between patches, and you just have to do it. But that's where I'll engage compression, is just to kind of keep things under control so that they're not jumping out at you. Yeah, like I don't do anything other than the waves on my EQ and the waves on my master mix bus, and a little bit of effects and reverb, and that's pretty much it. Like I said, I like to be able to create my mix wherever I am with whatever I have. So whatever I can do to not be like, oh, we didn't get like this whole rack of stuff that I requested, now I can't do my show. I don't want to be in that situation. And I do a lot of stuff where it's fly out, do this, fly over here, and you have different gear everywhere you go.
You picked the Pro X. Does it sound like the other Pro Series consoles? Is there a sound difference?
I think they all have basically the same kind of head amp sound. They all sound very similar. It's just little minor differences in the surfaces and the number of inputs and outputs, I believe. And I'm not sure if the Pro 2 has all of the same effects. I think they all do have the same effects now, but I'm not exactly sure. Like the last time I used the Pro 2, when I was out with Mr. Big, and we were just doing a tour in Europe where we had like a bus in the trailer and had a little Pro 2 that fit in the trailer nicely with everything else. And there, it was 24 inputs. The Pro 2 is perfect. I don't need a Pro X for that. It's funny when you go back and forth because where the master section it's at a different place. I'm always like, oh, wait, no, it's up here today, So it's getting used to that. But I think it's basically the same, just different number of inputs and outputs.
Cool.
Yeah.
So secret sauce is kind of like...
I'm more organic. Yeah.
Organic.
Yeah.
Well, I love that.
And nothing against like, guys who have racks of outboard gear and tons of plugins and stuff, like all that's great. And I think if you've got the luxury of working with a band where you're with them long enough that your show is on autopilot, and all right, well, what can I do to make my day more interesting? That's great. Or you have the budget to have all of your stuff with you everywhere you go. Sure, why not? Like if I knew that every show I do with Elvis, I'm going to have exactly what I want, I'd probably have a bit more outboard gear. But saving that, I just want to make it easier for me to know that I'm going to have consistency.
To me, I want to do the same thing: is keep it as clean, concise, and I can start my desk up and there's my show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing too about consistency is that when your front of house mix is consistent, it really helps the monitor engineer, because your mix affects what's happening on stage so much. So if it's drastically changing from day to day, that makes the monitor engineer's job so much harder because they've got their great mix dialed in. And now the next day it sounds completely different in the house. So they've got to redo everything. And we often forget we're all on the same team trying to work together and make everybody's job easier rather than harder. So, that's a big thing too. Kind of always think about like, how can I help you? How can you help me? So we both have a great show.
Awesome. It looks like we've gotten to the point where we are jumping into the quickfire questions. I told everyone who we were talking to today just to get some really simple one-word answer questions for you. So let's go ahead and start off with the first question. What's your favorite console?
Oh, that's easy. ATI Paragon, old analog beast.
Yeah, I kind of thought that's what you were going to answer. Okay, and then the next question is additive or subtractive EQ?
Oh, definitely. We'll cut first before boosting, always. So subtractive, if I had to choose. Yeah. Okay,
cool. Top, middle, or bottom bunk?
Oh, middle.
Middle? Yeah. It's the best one.
Yeah.
VCA, FET, or opto compressor?
Oh, it depends on what you're using it for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But blindly, what would you choose that you feel like you could use on everything? Just out of curiosity.
Probably Opto.
Okay, cool. And then, courtesy of Michael Lawrence, creamy or crunchy peanut butter?
Creamy peanut butter, crunchy almond butter.
All right. Specifics. I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this little show of mine.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
It was great talking to you. Thanks again.
You too. And hopefully we will see each other in person on the road somewhere soon.
I would love that. I would love to catch a show.
Me too.
All right. Well, take care.
You too.
Well, that's it for this episode of Over Your Shoulder. Again, I want to thank Michelle for coming on and sharing her time and her knowledge with all of us. If you dug this video, please like, please share, and please subscribe. Until next time, take care and be safe.